green. So yep, so as you can see, the title of the paper has changed a bit. So this is the joint paper with George. We still not sure what to call this paper yet, but we changed it to this way. So this is the co-authored paper with George, and you'll see why in a minute. I'll go through it quickly. I know I've got about 20 minutes, but I'll go through some of the big results. As you probably, everybody here is already familiar with, we have been looking well-being regressions all throughout our careers. And since Andrew is here, this is one of your classic happiness equations for the United States. And you can see you can make trade-offs between different socioeconomic predictors of what makes people happy, and we can quantify it. But of course, the field has moved on by quite a lot, especially on the measurement. And as Richard has been very involved with this, and I'm sure Jan has, and Andrew has as well, and John as well, there have been, we have tried to, especially in the World Happiness Report, looking at different dimensions of well-being. I don't need to spend too much time here. Of course, as economists, we've looked a lot at the evaluative well-being, things like life satisfaction. And with the Gallup World Poll, we have now looked at the experience well-being a little bit of looking at the structure of the experience well-being equation. And fewer people have looked at mnemonic well-being. But today, George and I would like to do something a little bit different. And that is we want to zoom in on the experience well-being a little bit more. And that is the presence of positive affects. But basically, we only look at positive affects today because that's what we have in the Mappiness data, and it kind of like try to reflect how we feel from day to day or moment to moment happiness. And so we have learned a lot about in the past, especially when we work as economists using large scale data set, about the socioeconomic predictors of experience well-being, especially with the Gallup World Poll, but tend to be a snapshot of the question that asks once a year. What we know much less about in the large scale is the within-person variability or the volatility of experience well-being. In other words, from day to day, week to week, how volatile our experience of positive well-being over time, over a short period of time, I should say. So as you can see, these figures kind of tell us two people who could have the same mean or the average of experience well-being, which is a moment-to-moment happiness, but could very well have a very different variability or within-person variability. And basically, we want to see in a large scale, in a nutshell, what predicts somebody to report a much greater variability than others. When we first wrote this paper, George and I thought, we're the first people to do this. And then we submitted to a paper, and then they told us, no, you weren't. Because there are so many psychologists already who looked at intrapersonal variability in affects. But then when we look at the literature a little bit more, they have always been on a very, very small scale. They were very ad hoc and just basically focusing on one thing at a time. So for example, Almeida looked at gender and gender only, and 166 people over the course of 42 days. Jasimovich looked at financial scarcity. Visconti looked at bereavement, for example. So for economists, like myself and George, and everybody in this room, we'd like to know, well, actually, yeah, we might know about the directions of something, let's say, maybe female report higher variability than male. But in terms of policy, and if we care about variability at all, we would like to know not only about the direction, but how much in terms of quantitative difference across different things. What are the trade-offs and so on? And henceforth, George and I teamed up and we looked at the Mappiness data, which has been used a lot, especially by George, I guess, to look at all different kinds of stuff. If you're not familiar with Mappiness data, it's basically an experience sampling method. And I think we have more than 3 million observations over time. In the data that we have more than 41,000 individuals in the United Kingdom. And when we look at intra-week, which is within week variability, we have, I think, more than 30,000, 30,000 observations of variability. And we have information about other things like all the income levels, gender, children, and even the geographical location. Right. So I'm sure many people would be familiar with this already. So since time limited, I'll just go on forward a little bit more. This is how experience well-being data is measured in Mappiness. So if you don't know, Mappiness will randomly ping you throughout the day at a different time, and it will ask you to rate on a scale, which is a horizontal sliding scale to be not tall to extremely far right, treated as 100. So we have quite a lot of variability within that. And you might be asked more than once a day. For the purpose of this research that we started off with, and we did a lot of robustness checks after, and we still have a bit more robustness checks to do. But for the moment, the results that we're going to be presenting today is basically we're taking randomly one report per day. So one random report per day, and we use that to create what we call the intra-week variability. So this intra-week variability variable is basically a standard deviation within a week of how much fluctuation of this positive affects vary within a week. We only found out recently that there is another scale that we could have used, which we haven't done it yet, that takes mean into account, because obviously people who report higher mean happiness would not have a lot of room to move in terms of variability. It's only, you can only move below that. So there is another scale, but for the moment, anyway, what we have done is we're conditioning the weekly average happiness in the regression itself. But I think there are other ways to do it as well, and we might have to come back to that later. So regression analysis is a very simple one. Many people would be familiar with this. Is basically looking at a variability as the dependent variable. We have a vector of socio-demographic variables that do not change over time. So as you can imagine, if you employ or unemployed in the Mappiness data, you tend not to change your status. So it's kind of fixed over time. So a lot of these variables are time invariant, but we are able to deal with individual fixed effects a little later on, which I'll explain how, if I have a bit more time. And yeah, any questions so far? I think that if you don't have, I'll just carry on. Thanks to Andrew. When we started off with this research, we only look at the variability, and Andrew has very kindly suggested to us that maybe we might want to look at the asymmetry as well, which is basically how often within a week do people spend being temporarily high or temporarily low in terms of their emotions. So not only we look at how much fluctuation happens, but also whether the distribution within a week is skewed towards the negative or the positive. And the way we did that, which is the A equation here, which is the Skewness Wellbeing Index, because within week is a small sample, it was hard to try to find a way to calculate. We found an equation like a Gini index, but it requires more observations of person within week to do this inequality of the distribution. So what we've done here, we use the kind of small sample inequality index, which is the mean per week minus by the median over the standard deviation or the volatility per week. And that will give us some idea of whether the mean is lower than the median or higher than the median. And it'll give us some kind of idea of how asymmetrical it is. This is a distribution of the standardized intra-week well-being. So we standardize all of this to have a mean of 0 and standard deviation of 1, a typical thing to do. So we can interpret everything as a standard deviation change. It's quite skewed into the variability variable is quite skewed. So this is the mean. This is the weekly average. This is the weekly volatility. And this is the almost quite normal, the asymmetry index. Okay, so now the reason why
Nick, could you go back to the middle one?
This one. Yep.
Why has it got that cliff on the left-hand side?
So cliff on the left-hand side, I think this is so people who have no variability at all, I guess, almost. So I think we have a long tail of people who have lots of variability. So this measures how much, the standard movement within person. I am not sure why it looks like this. We just don't have it's a very skewed distribution. So my understanding is that we don't have a lot of people who didn't report no movement at all by week. So they just keep reporting the same happiness.
But zero is not the cliff. The cliff is somewhere negative.
This is standardized.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, this is standardized, have a mean of 0.
Yeah, I get it. So 0 is very negative. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, the reason why I rushed to now, because I wanted to have asked for all of our experts' predictions. So if you can humor me for a second, if you can open a web browser and type in vvox.app, and it will ask you for ID 148.121.370. So open another web browser and you just type in 148.121.370. I'm going to ask one basic live polling question.
Are you asking us to do this now, Nick?
Yes, please, Andrew. If you could do it now, that would be great.
You realize this is the end of Friday afternoon. But
yes, of course. Of course. That's why I'm doing this, so that you are engaged in this presentation. So I have 6 people logging in. I know we have 18, so let's see if we can at least get 10 people. All right. What I'm going to do now, I'm going to open the poll so you can start answering the question now. So basically, the question that I asked is, which of these social demographic status do you think are the top 3 determinants of greater intra-week volatility in moment-to-moment happiness? So if you look at the, you can start voting now. So 10 people have signed in. Let's see if I can share. Has anybody done selecting? Or are you still
What's
thinking?
the time frame for this? Is it during COVID, your data, or is it pre-COVID?
This is pre-COVID, by the way. This is
okay,
2010 to 2016. Yeah.
Thanks. Because living in London during COVID, not a lot of volatility. But pre-COVID, I would have imagined to be a bit more exciting.
Yeah. So we got one person logging in. I don't want to waste too much time here, but let's see what people would say. So you can select up to 3. So for the people who are not participating, we have a 1% increase in household income, unemployment, motherhood, marriage, getting divorced or separated, that kind of thing. Okay, so got 8 people. I'm gonna close the poll in a minute now. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and you can. For you who log in, you will be able to see what the majority of people answered. So 12 people answered. I'll read it out. 58% of you think motherhood is the biggest contributor to variability. Right? Motherhood is the biggest one, and then we have getting divorced is the second. Living in London is the second, half of you, and then we have unemployment. A few of you only think that a 1% increase in household income contributes only 8%, and nobody thought retirement contribute to greater variability. Well, let's have a look at the results. The reason why I answered this is because this is probably one of the first time most people see this kind of equation. So here in column 1, we have a typical intra-week. So this is average happiness per week regressing as the dependent variable. And then we have all of this as the outcome variable. And I hope you could see this, but the majority of these predictors work in the way that we thought they would. So things like income is positively correlated with, how happy you feel moment to moment on average. And then we have, long-term disabled is severely negative. We have no statistical significance for whether or not you have children, whether you're female or male. And then you can see that being married is good. Being
We
separated.
blew it on the motherhood thing.
Sorry?
We must have blown it on the motherhood.
Well, that's the average, right? Is that Carol? I don't know who.
Yeah, yeah, it's me.
Oh, hello, Carol.
Hey, Nick.
But if you look at the volatility, which is the second column,
Oh, okay.
your prediction is right, because female with children is basically the single most important predictor of how variable it is.
Oh, great. All right. Wasn't so wrong.
No, you're right. Everybody, most people here are correct. It's 0.3135 on terms of standard deviation. So that's comparing to male no children. And maybe I should also add that female without children compared to male without children, female also report higher intra-week variability. But being male with children compared to being female with no children, male with children still report lower variability with female with no children. But there is some difference in terms of a statistical significance having children, both being male and female. Income, on the other hand, the richer you are, the lower variability you report. So income has this almost kind of, I want to address the causality very lightly here, but there is seem to be protective effect. In a sense, it reduces how much volatility you experience on a week-to-week basis. Retirement, as you correctly said, report very, very low volatility compared to employed. And let me just move on a little bit more. But one of the things that are quite interesting is that things like long-term sickness or being disabled report lower average happiness, but also low average volatility, which means that it's much harder for them to ever experience even the temporary highs because it's always, when they're low, they remain low. I think I've got about maybe less than 10 minutes left, so I'll just go through quite quickly and we can come back to this. Right. So just to put things into perspective, these are the coefficients, and we can kind of rank them from the greatest to the lowest. But of course, you need to judge this together with how these relate to the average well-being as well. So as you can see, female with children report one of the highest coefficients. Obviously, this is relative to whatever the reference point is. And then you can look down, you can see long-term sickness. People in full-time education report lower variability. So this is a variability coefficient. But you can actually put it in terms of when you put it in the same diagram as mean happiness. And we might be able to put things into four quadrant to things that are probably good for our happiness and also, but might not be so great with variability. And then the things that not good for our happiness, but also report lower variability as well. I should also mention that psychologists have found that people who experience greater volatility in their experience well-being also report lower life satisfaction on average. But that kind of based on small sample as well. Okay, I'm just going through very quickly now. I'm going to try to finish this in the next few slides if I can. H in happiness, U-shape. But as we grow older, there is this kind of declining variability profile in H. This is income. So an increase in income correlates quite positively with moment-to-moment happiness. And in a convex way, there is a decline in the standard deviation of happiness, which is the volatility with income as well. What about intra-week asymmetry? Actually, that's another important result. So here, this is an intra-week, the Schooner's equation. Most of the things in the Schooner's equation came up statistically insignificant. Only two things stand out. and that is still the motherhood. For mothers, female with children, they report a negative coefficient in asymmetry, which kind of represent that within a week, per standard deviation of the volatility, they report more temporary lows, emotional lows per week compared to any other group. So if you're female with children, not only that you report higher variability, you also it tends to skew towards the negative. Wow. The other one, which is positive and statistically significant, is being in full-time education. So students tend to report more temporary highs than others. How to deal with unobserved heterogeneity bias, right? As you know, individual fixed effects feature a lot in all of our work, but since lots of these don't change over time, what we did was we implemented what Jan and I have done before in our other paper, which is the fixed effects filtered model, which allow you to filter fixed effects out, but still keep you all the things that don't change over time in the model. I'm not going to spend time talking about this. If anybody would like a tip of how to run this, you can just email me afterwards. It's quite useful. It allows you to estimate variables, the coefficients for the things that do not change over time, but still being able to control for the individual fixed effects. And the results that we got are remarkably similar. It doesn't really change in terms of the trade-offs, in terms of directions. The results that we got before still robust, especially female with children. To what extent are these findings representative? There's a question that I guess George get all the time. Since we asked the question about life satisfaction as well, the structure of life satisfaction equation is similar to those that we often see from understanding society, for example. Things like income still highly predictive of life satisfaction, being married and all these things. So it gives us some reassurance that the Mappiness data, although not representative of the entire population, can nevertheless still produce findings that are representative to what we understand in the literature.
Is the Mappiness data skewed towards younger people, because isn't it Twitter and
yes,
data like that?
I think maybe George can answer this better than me, but I think the highest age is 50 something.
Yeah, I mean, it's not Twitter, but it is largely people who had an iPhone in 2010. So it does skew young. I think we have 2/3 of people under 35 and 95% of people under 55 or something along those lines. So yes, it's a little bit younger.
Does it also skew rich or no?
Yes, so the median household income is about twice what would be representative. Yeah.
So it would be nice to know what kind of results we would get if we have a representative sample of this. Of course, the great thing about Mappiness data is that it's high frequency. We have a lot of frequency in terms of people reporting, which we wouldn't get otherwise in a typical household survey.
I would think your female with children result would just get stronger.
Yes, that's what we thought.
You know, poor women with children have a harder time. There's no doubt about it, right?
That's what we thought as well. I mean, that's a good point, Carol, because we thought that, and even among this sample, women who experience like really, tough time raising child, they might not even report, right? They might, if it's ping, they might not even pick it up. So there's attenuation bias here going on, that the people who really experience this huge variability might not have the time to answer, when they're pinged. So I think you're right, and the results might be even bigger. How much bigger, we don't know. Can within-person variability in activity explain away the results? Well, we know that experience well-being highly correlates with how you spend your day. So luckily, George asked that in Mappiness. So we look at how much. Well, we kind of use almost like the unlikability index, which is whether you use a lot of activities within a day. And we found that it relates to variability, but it doesn't explain away a lot of these results. because we thought that if you change your activities a lot per day, that might explain why you report a lot of fluctuations, but it doesn't, including it, I don't know if you can see at the bottom here, it doesn't really change the results that we found in the beginning. So here, another robustness check, which I don't need to find time to talk about. I'll skip through some of these things because I think I'm running out of time now. But the final point I wanted to make is that I believe that our findings might have an important implication on affective forecasting, which is, our ability to, or our inability to accurately forecast our emotional reactions in the future. Things like asking whether does having children makes you happy. Most people say yes, because they tend to focus their attention on the positive things only. But if we switch that question to, how much variability and something or life event would create, or would bring you, people might be much more accurate, like how you're quite accurately predicting motherhood to be one of the biggest thing here. And it might change the way people think about stuff. So people might be much more accurate in predicting variability than the average well-being.
But how, sorry, Nick, but how good would
Yep.
the average person be at predicting their volatility and affect? I mean, we might think about those things, but the average, that's going to be a tough question to ask. Or at
Well,
least
I would like
to
see, I don't know an answer to this, but I would like to see, if you were to ask somebody to predict how would be a motherhood, what would be the impact of motherhood on, how your moods or your fluctuation in moods in a day, or how would income impact you, comparing to how, whether this motherhood makes you happy. I think people might give a much more accurate representation of what we find in, by running regressions, because we know that asking people to predict how happy would a higher income give you, and all those things, people kind of widely mispredict it. According to what affective
I think
forecasting
they
is.
would mispredict motherhood as well. I think they would be much more likely to report accurately how it had been.
How it had been.
How it had been. So you'd have to, you could get much more accurate retrospective answers on volatility than predictions, I think.
That could be. I would love to, if somebody could do this kind of research, or I'll do it myself later. But yeah, it's something that would, because I think that would have some implication on people's behaviors afterwards, if they think much more holistically, because I think the variability index is a more holistic measure of, compared to the mean, but I could be wrong. Anyway, the conclusions, I won't go through it because it's what I kind of said, and I'll conclude here. Thank you very much.